got to do the end cap first, but before you get into the cab, you want her to check all your outside lights. Okay? So, after that's said, you're going to get into the truck. Okay, so you get in the truck, you put your seatbelt on. Okay, after you get your seatbelt on, she's going to be on the outside in front of the truck, okay? So you're going to tell her, left turn, right turn, four-way flashers, headlights and clearance lights, high beams and low beams. Then you're going to have her go to the back of the truck. Gonna do the same thing basically. Left turn, right turn, four-way flashers, clearance lights, and brake lights. After that, you're going to have her go to the back of the trailer. You'll do left turn, right turn, four-way flashers, clearance lights and running lights, and my brake lights. At that point, she's going to come around and she's going to get into the cab. So you guys want to just get in the cab, I'll then run through this for you. So I'm going to have the engine running, so do you want to get inside?
Yeah.
So you get into the cab with you. Okay? What you're going to do is you're going to do a safety start to get the vehicle running so you can perform your air system supply check. So you're going to do a safety start. You're going to make sure the brakes are set. Vehicle's in neutral. Just hover over the brake pedal and you're going to start the engine. Okay. So we need at least 110 pounds to actually start this test. So we're going to build our air pressure up until the air governor cuts out. That's going to be a burst of air and our gauge will stop.
Are you stepping on the pedal slightly?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to accelerate it up to get our air pressure built up as quick as possible. Okay, I heard the burst air out of the air governor and my gauge stopped moving, about 120 pounds. So now I'm ready to do my air supply systems check. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to release all my brakes. My first test is going to be the air supply, or the air leak test. During this test, I'm going to hold down the brake for 1 minute or until my gauge starts moving. Okay? Combination vehicle, we cannot lose more than 4 pounds of pressure in 1 minute. So I'm going to hold down the brake. So I'll hold down the brake either for 1 minute or until my gauge starts rising. Okay, my gauge is rising. That test is complete. My next test is going to be my low air warning systems check. During this test, I'm going to fan down the brakes. My low air warning should activate above 60 pounds. It must come on by 55 pounds. It'll be a light, a buzzer, or a flag in the older vehicles. Low air warning activated, about 65 pounds. That test is complete. Okay, my next test is going to be my tractor protection valve and my parking brake. During this test, I'm going to fan down the brakes. These valves should pop out in between 20 and 40 pounds. Now I'm going to fan down the brakes. The tractor protection valve parking brake activated, about 35 pounds. That test is complete. Now that I'm through with my brake test, I'm going to continue on with the rest of my in-cab inspection. Okay? I'm going to go through my gauges. My oil pressure is rising and the warning light went out. My water temperature is rising and the warning light went out. My alternator is charging and the warning light went out. My air compressor is building air. I'll know when my tanks are full when this gauge stops moving in between 100 and 120 pounds. Or I hear a burst of air out the air governor cutout. While I'm still looking at my instrument panel, I'm going to go through my inside indicator lights. And do my left turn, right turn, four-way flashers, my high beam, and my low beam. Next thing I'm going to check is my horn.
Call that a horn?
Next thing I'm going to check is my heater and my defroster. My defroster works and my heater works. From there I'm going to go to my windshield. I'm going to make sure it's secure and clean. There's no cracks or chips in it, and there's no illegal stickers to impair my vision. Next I'm going to check my windshield wipers and my washer fluid. My windshield wipers are securely mounted. There's no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts, and they're not damaged. My wiper blades are not ripped or torn, and they operate properly. My washer fluid is operating properly. Next thing I'm going to check is my mirrors. They are properly adjusted. There's no cracks or chips, no illegal stickers to impair my vision. Next thing I'm going to check is my seatbelt. It's properly adjusted. There's no rips or tears. It's securely mounted. No broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. Over here on the right side of the left side of the seat is my fire extinguisher. It is secure. No broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. It's properly rated and charged. Underneath the seat is 3 reflective triangles. Got spare fuses in the glove box. Just heard my air governor activate. Now I know that my air tanks are full. I'm going to perform my next 3 brake tests. First test I'm going to do is my parking brake. I'm going to release my trailer brake. I'm going to put the vehicle in drive. And I'm going to pull against it. The truck didn't move, so that test is complete. I'm going to reset my brakes. Now I'm going to check my trailer brake. I'm going to release the parking brake. Put the vehicle in drive and pull against it. The brakes held. That test is complete. Now I'm going to release all of my brakes and check my service brake. Put the vehicle in drive and roll forward. Service brake operated properly. That test is complete. Put the vehicle back in neutral. Just make sure that I covered everything in here. So I got my gauges, inside indicators, got my horn, heater and defrost, got my windshield, wipers, my mirrors, my seatbelt, fire extinguisher, triangles, and spare fuses. At that time, I believe I'm finished with my in-cab inspection. Shut the engine off, make sure the brakes are set, and I'm ready to do the outside. Before I open the hood, I'm going to just check my headlights and my clearance lights. I'm going to make sure that they operate properly, there's no chips or cracks in them, and I have amber to the front. Alright, I'm going to start with my coolant reservoir. I'm going to check my coolant reservoir. It's got a sight glass, but if it didn't have a sight glass, I'd wait for the engine to cool down and I'd visually check it. I'm going to make sure that my coolant reservoir is securely mounted. There's no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. And it's not cracked or dented. I'm going to check all of my hoses on my coolant system. I'm going to make sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. They're not rubbing against any other parts. And I'm going to check all my clamps and fittings to make sure that they are secure, tight, and not leaking. I'm going to check my alternator. The alternator is belt driven. It operates properly. And on my belts, there's no more than 1/2 inch to 3/4 deflection on it. My belts are not ripped or torn. I'm going to check all my wires on my alternator. I'm going to make sure that they are secure and tight. I'm going to check my wires, make sure there's no cracked, exposed, or burnt wires on there. On my water pump, I'm going to make sure that it's securely mounted. There's no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. It's not cracked and it's not leaking. Water pump is actually belt driven and it operates properly, and on my belt there's no more than 1/2 inch to 3/4 deflection on it. This side of the engine, I'm going to check my oil level, make sure it's in between the add and the full. Actually, I've already checked my belts on the other side, so we're good on that. Okay, I'm going to check my air compressor. Again, it's securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. There's no air leaking from the bottom. No oil leaking from the bottom, no air from the top. It's gear driven and it operates properly. The back of my air compressor is my power steering pump. It is securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. It is gear driven, it operates properly. I'm going to check all my hoses on my power steering system. There's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. There's no abrasive damage from rubbing against any other parts. I'm going to check all of my fittings and clamps. Make sure that they are tight and not leaking. Check my power steering reservoir. It's got a sight glass. I'm going to make sure it's in between the add and the full. If it didn't have a sight glass, I'd visually check it by removing the cap. Securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. It is not leaking. I already checked all my hoses on that, so we're good to go on that. The steering box is securely mounted to the frame, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. It's not cracked or dented, and it is not leaking. I already checked all my hoses when I talked about the power steering pump. Okay, on my steering linkage, I'm going to make sure it's not cracked, bent, dented, or damaged. All my nuts and bolts are present. There is none missing. All my Carter keys are in place. I'm going to check the joints and sockets, make sure they're not excessively worn. My spring hanger mount is securely mounted to the frame. No broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. It's not cracked or dented. On my springs, I'm going to make sure they are not cracked, shifted, or missing. They are securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. And I'm going to check my bushing, make sure it's not excessively worn. My U-bolts, securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. They are not bent or twisted. Shock absorber. Gonna make sure it's securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts, and it is not leaking. On my brake lines, gonna make sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. There's no abrasive damage from rubbing on any other parts. I'm gonna check my fittings and clamps, make sure that they are tight and not leaking. On my brake chamber, again, it is securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. It's not cracked or dented. I'm going to check this clamp right here, make sure it is tight and not leaking. My slack adjusters and my push rods. I'm going to make sure they are not bent or cracked or damaged. All the nuts and bolts are there. There is none missing, and it is securely mounted. All the Carter keys in place. And with a manual slack adjuster, with the brakes released, there should not be no more than 1 inch pull on them. Gonna check my brake linings or my brake shoes. I'm gonna make sure that they are securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts and or parts. And there's at least a 1/4 inch of brake shoe there. With no cracks or grooves, no oil or grease. On my brake hub, gonna make sure there's no cracks, grooves, or holes, and there is no oil or grease. On my tires, I'm gonna make sure they are evenly worn. There's at least 4/32 tread depth. My sidewalls, I'm gonna make sure there's no tread separation. There's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. There's no abrasive damage. On my bead flange, I'm gonna make sure it's not cracked or dented. On my rim, I'm gonna make sure there's no illegal welds. There's no cracks radiating in between my lug bolt holes, and there's no distortion around my bolt holes. I'm gonna check my lug nuts, make sure they're all present. There is none missing. Signs of a loose lug nut is a rust trail or shiny thread. On my wheel seal, all my nuts and bolts are there. There is none missing. It is not leaking. If it had a side glass, I check the side glass. If it doesn't, I remove this plug and visually check it. My valve stem, securely mounted, is not cracked, bent, or damaged. And to check the inflation in the tire, I've used a tire gauge. On my mirrors, they're securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. There's no cracks or chips, no illegal sticks. My cab door opens and closes properly. The hinges are intact, they are securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts, and my door seal is intact. Opens and closes properly. My steps in my fuel tank. Again, like everything, it's securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. All my clamps are secure and tight. There's no cracks or holes, and the fuel cap is tight. While I'm checking that, I'm going to check underneath there, make sure there's no fuel leaking, no oil, no coolant, transmission fluid underneath the cap. Check my exhaust. I make sure it is securely mounted, broken, loose, missing nuts and bolts. All my clamps are tight, there's no holes or cracks. Signs of a leak would be a rust trail or a soot trail, man. Like my Caribbean buddy said. I'm going to check my drive line. It's not cracked, bent, or damaged. Securely mounted, all the nuts and bolts are present, there is none missing. I'm going to check my U-joints, make sure there's no foreign objects in there and they're properly lubricated. My frame and my cross members, they are not cracked or bent. Securely mounted, broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. Check my catwalk, it's securely mounted to the frame, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts, and there's no foreign objects that could fall out during transit. On my airline and my electrical cord, I'm going to make sure that they are secure at both ends. My glad hands are tight and they are not leaking. On my air hoses, they are not cut, cracked, bulging, they are not spliced, taped, or pinched. Electrical cord is secure at both ends. There's no cuts, cracks, exposed, or burned wires. They are not spliced or taped. And it's not, any of this is not rubbing against any other parts. Front of my trailer, no cracks or holes, no missing, broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts and or rivets. From the front of the trailer, I'm going to go to the apron. There's no cracks, dents, no damage. On my apron, I'm going to check my fifth wheel skid plate. going to make sure there's no gap between the apron and the skid plate, and there is lots of grease on there, man. Skid plate is securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts and or pin. Check my release handle, make sure it's in the lock position. It has nuts and bolts, they are all present, there is none missing. My platform base, it is securely mounted to the frame, there's no cracks or dents. All the nuts and bolts are present, there is none missing. Okay, from this suspension, I like to work my way from the inside out. So I'm going to start with my air lines, my brake lines. They're not cracked, cut, or bulging. There is no abrasive damage from rubbing against any other parts, and my clamps and fittings are secure and not leaking. Check my brake chamber. Again, securely mounted, no broken, loose, and missing nuts and bolts. It's not cracked or dented. I'm going to check this clamp, make sure it's tight and not leaking. In the back of that brake can is my slack adjusters and push rods. Again, they are securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts and or parts. They are not cracked or bent. With the brakes released, there's no more than 1 inch play in them. There, I'm going to go to my U-bolts. They are not cracked, bent, or damaged. They are secure, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. From there, I'm going to go up. This is my torque spring. It's different from my leaf springs. On my torque spring, they are not cracked, shifted, or missing. They are securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. And I'm going to check my bushing, make sure it's not excessively worn. I'm going to check my spring hanger. It's securely mounted to the frame, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. There's no cracks or dents. My leaf springs, they're securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts. They are not cracked, shifted, or missing. My brake linings, or my brake shoes. There's at least a 1/4 inch of brake shoe there. They are securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts and or parts. No cracks or grooves, no oil or grease. On my brake hub, there's no cracks or grooves or holes, and there is no oil or grease. On my dual tires, they're evenly worn. There's at least 2 30-second tread depths on them. There's no foreign objects in between them, they're not rubbing, and there's no gap in between my rims. On my sidewall, there's no tread separation. Cuts, cracks, or bulges, no abrasive damage. On my B flange, it's not cracked or dented or damaged. On my rim, there's no illegal weld. There's no cracks radiating in between my lug bolt holes, and there's no distortion around my bolt holes. All my lug nuts are present, there is none missing. Signs of a loose lug nut would be a rust trail or shiny thread. On this hub seal, it's a little different than the front. All my nuts and bolts are there, there is none missing, and it is not leaking. Check the fluid in that, I would have to remove the plug off the differential to check it. Valve stems, not cracked, bent, or damaged. Check the inflation in the tire, I'd use a tire gauge. From here, I'm going to go to my mud flap. They are securely mounted, no broken, loose, or missing nuts and bolts and or parts. No rips or tears. They hit at least the center line of the axle. My reflective tape is clean and secure and not missing. From there, I'm going to check my lights. They operate properly. There's no cracks or chips. Got red to the rear. While I'm underneath there, I'm going to check my kingpin. I'm going to make sure it's not cracked, bent,